OldSchool Runescape is approaching its 10th anniversary, and with a game so long running and successful, it's easy to forget that it all started with this small team. Alongside mods Ash and Reach, Mod Matt K was among one of the driving forces behind OldSchool's growth. As a senior product manager for Jagex, Matt brought some of the game's largest updates to fruition. We're talking some of the game's most iconic releases like Deadman Mode, Iron Man, and Zaya. But more than that, Matt was the face of OldSchool and really felt like the dad of the community. In 2019, Matt exited Jagex to pursue other career opportunities, leaving massive shoes for the company to fill. While his departure was widely received with sadness and reluctance by the community, Matt's contractual ties being cut with the company have allowed him to speak candidly about Jagex and OldSchool alike. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Matt to ask the questions that we've all wanted answers to. Some are surface level and others are hard hitters, but Matt didn't shy away from a single one. I'm Zord, and this is a tell-all with Mod Matt K. Matt, for anyone who might not know, could you give just like a brief introduction of who you are and what your role was for Jagex?
So I started playing RuneScape back in 2004, and my wife got me playing it. And a job came up in the local newspaper for Jagex, so I joined Jagex in player support back in 2005. Quickly moved into community management and worked in community management for 10 years. Then OldSchool came out, and I sort of took over OldSchool and worked through as a product manager in OldSchool.
Okay. And you were with Jagex until 2019, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's May 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, that feels about right.
It feels longer than that, but that doesn't actually seem that long ago. In terms of your time with Jagex, so you played a central role in a lot of major old school content design over the years, and among those many projects was Crack the Clue. And given that Crack the Clue 3 was just released a few days ago at the time of recording this, I'd like to dive into that a little bit if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Okay. So let's go back to the original Crack the Clue for a second. How exactly would you describe what the first Crack the Clue was?
Well, the first Crack the Clue was probably earlier than you're thinking, because the first they came out of the cryptic clue fests, which used to happen back in RuneScape 3.
Hmm.
So that was something that happened. I think it must have been mid 2000s they started kicking off, and I was doing. I wouldn't lead on it. I think it was Mod Pro. Yes, Mod Pro, I think, was the lead on it doing it. But I was putting input into it, and I found it really exciting that I could make cryptic crossword clues, and come up with some new ways of looking at things, which they used in these things. This happened every year for about 6 years, I think. And then OldSchool happened, and we were in a problem at the beginning of OldSchool because we didn't have a huge amount of content we could do. We didn't have a big amount of developers to make lots of new stuff, and Crack the Clue was a really cheap way of creating content for people to engage with. And I think it took probably a matter of hours to actually code it so it worked, because it was very straightforward. You had to have the assets made, but the actual go here with these items, digging a hole, was just such a small bit of code. It was very quick for us to make. And the whole idea was that every week a new clue would come out. You'd solve that individual clue as a clue scroll clue, which everybody would recognize. You solve that, and then you go and pick up a piece of armor. And then the second one, you go pick up the second piece of armor, then the third, then the fourth. And then the final piece of armor, I think it was the helmet. You have to combine all the different things within the clues, all the different clues within the clues to actually solve that last part.
Over the course of, I think it was a month, you released 4 different clues in a similar format to Clue Scrolls, as you just noted. But these were obviously way more difficult to solve. When you were designing these, how did you come up with the actual puzzles? Were you taking inspiration from the RS3 puzzles, or is this something that you completely developed on your own?
So I stole the idea from the ancient Mayans. So the Mayans made uh, this tomb, and it's called the Tomb of Palenque. And inside it, as a king was buried, and this king was considered a god by the ancient Mayans. And on top of his tomb, there was just this wonderful piece of artwork. And it says, if you look it up online, you'll see there's a piece of artwork which looks like the Mayans in a spaceship. And it's that piece of artwork they created. It's not a spaceship; it's a stack of different gods that just happens to look like a spaceship, and that's how our brains interpret it. But there's all these sort of symbols around it that nobody really understood, even sort of people who are really focused and understood what the Mayan language. They couldn't understand what they were talking about because these symbols were just they didn't know what they were. And it took this professor to copy the top of this tomb, the picture on the top of this tomb, onto a piece of acetate, create two pieces of acetate, then start crossing them over to actually unlock what it meant. And that sort of clicked in my brain is like what he's done is he's taken something which everybody expects to be in a certain way, and he's made it bigger and made it more visual, so you're physically moving stuff around. And that was sort of the inspiration of how you can make these clues work. The actual individual parts of it were quite simple to do because as soon as you know what the solution could be, creating the problems is a lot easier. The other
Hmm.
way around, creating a problem and solving the problem to find the solutions a lot more difficult than having the answer and then say, right, here's a problem to solve that, here's a problem to find that, here's a problem to find that. How do these all work together? And then how do you map them onto the main map? So it was very much a different case of people expect the world to be this big and to be finite and to be what I expect it to be. But if you start looking at it from a certain angle, then start moving things around and placing stuff on top, that's a connection that people didn't have back then. So when the first one came out, it was very hard for people to make that connection. Of course, now with the Crack the Clue 3, they're like, right, stick stuff on top of the world straight away, solve that bit, easy, because they've had that connection already made for them.
I think part of the magic of the first one was exactly what you're describing. Nobody in the community had seen any puzzles like this before, so there was no logic path, no precedent to follow for being
Mm.
able to set up the clues to solve. Was Crack the Clue 1 something that you expected players to solve quickly, or did you think that this was something that was going to take an exceptional amount of time?
Well, we were aiming for about a year, so we got pretty close to that, but we did have to drop in full on clues towards the end. Because it got to a stage where I think the hype around the beginning part of it was really quite exciting. People really enjoyed it, and they came up with all the different ways of doing it. And it must have been probably about 3 months in, every single part had been solved. But people hadn't connected those different parts in order to do everything in the right order and go to the right place. And it was just frustrating waiting for that last sort of 9 months to for them to solve it. So we started putting more and more things, and we were sort of having internal discussions about how do we give them the answer now. It's like no, we can't give them the answer. We've got to keep pushing it, and then eventually the guy whose name I can't remember, he solved it,
Pikachu
and
Yip.
that was
Yeah, who
that's
actually
it. Yeah,
was
Pikachu, yeah,
one of my acquaintances at the time, and I was shocked when I found out that he was the one who solved it. But
fantastic,
yeah.
and the second one as well, which was even better. So yeah, so that was quite amazing, and the relief when somebody solves it, you wouldn't believe. To have something which nobody could solve would have been worse than having something which was solved quickly, because it's just like it would just get so frustrating, and people go, "Oh my god, this is impossible," and what have you. But it just worked out nicely. Luck more than anything else, I think, made that happen.
Well, I didn't realize that the community was very close after the first 3 months, and it was actually like the last step that took
Mhm.
9 months or so afterwards. I recall that during every single one of the Q&As, people were just like taking meticulous notes, every single thing you said. They were like, "Is this a hint to crack the clue?" They were begging you for clues. You wouldn't give anything. I'm curious if you were to do the whole thing over again, would you approach it any differently, or did the original kind of check all the boxes that you were looking for?
I think I can't think of a way to improve on the original. Um, I think that lasted the right amount of time. It created, I mean, it's stuff that happened I never believed would. I mean, we created communities off the back of it, which is just like, wow. I mean, that's nuts. And people are still talking about it to this day. Obviously, it's been hyped up a bit in the last couple of weeks, of course. But people are still talking about it. And I still get, even before Crack the Clue 3 was announced, I still get people who just randomly reply to my comments on Twitter who'll be like, oh, is that a Crack the Clue 3 hint? It's like, before they even announced it, it's like, oh, okay. So it's just part of history now, which is I can't ask for much more than that.
Absolutely. And that brings us to Crack the Clue 3 now, which, in my opinion, the second one was a little bit of a disappointment. I
Mm.
don't recall if you were involved in that one or not, but
Yeah, yeah, no, I designed that one too. So
okay. Players ultimately brute forced it though, so it sort of killed the fun, in my opinion. Jagex outsourced the design of this one over to Wooks. So first of all, I was thinking, what do you think about their decision to have Wooks design this third one?
I think it's interesting. I mean, who else are you going to give it to? If they said they designed it themselves, I mean, the impact compared to getting weeks to design it is, what can you do? It is, he's the best person to do it, I think,
D-
and I think it's a good call they got him to do it. So
did Wooks hit you up at any point and say, "Hey Matt, I have to design Crack the Clue 3. I need some tips, man"?
no.
Do you think that you will personally be able to solve Crack the Clue 3 with your knowledge of how the first and second Crack the Clues were designed?
I don't think so, but I mean, we had a go on live streamed on Saturday, and we sort of had a go at breaking some of the things there, and we got a bit. We didn't get any further forward, but we tried out a few different things. But it's a case of that even the current ones, it's a case of understanding. I don't know whether we want to understand this, but how Wooks' mind works in order to actually understand how to solve the clue. Because if you think about cryptic crosswords, and I spend a lot of time doing cryptic crosswords. In order to understand what somebody means when they write a cryptic crossword, you've got to understand that person. And the more you do this person's cryptic crosswords, the more you understand their mind. Therefore, the easier it is to find answers. And one of the fascinating things going through the stuff last night, they all seem to be predicated around three things and a person. So whether that's three people, or three items, or three emotes, but everything seems to be in fours, in groups of four. So it's almost like the first batch of four clues are something which unlocks another batch of four clues, which you then combine to make the final answer. But we'll see when as we get through it. We had to play with all the different things, and that's quite fun. Might do that tonight as well, actually. So
I was watching that stream that you were referring to actually, and by the way, for anyone listening, I will be linking Matt's stream in the description, so definitely check that out. It's a ton of fun to see the original creator on the other side of the puzzle. Does it give you a level of appreciation for the confusion that you put the community through and Crack the Clue 1?
I always appreciated that. That was half the fun of it.
I'm actually very surprised hearing you say that you intended the first Crack the Clue to last a year. Um, because to design a puzzle that takes not only a year to solve, but a year with a large, group of the community all working together to solve, I don't think most people could do that if they set out to do that. So the fact that you guys kind of hit that right on the head is really interesting. And whether or not this third one lasts a whole year, I would like to see it take a really long time. And it would be
Yes,
cool
yeah.
if you were the one to crack it as well.
that would be poetic justice, I think, wouldn't it? But I think somebody will get there before me, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's luck more than anything else. We had an aim of what we wanted to do. We designed something with some key steps which were quite difficult to do. But I think the most difficult part was just linking it all together. Because, like I said, after 3 months, all the individual problems have been solved. But no one person had solved them all. So nobody had that sort of full picture in their head. And it took the last 9 months for someone to sort of get all those bits together and then find out what the final solution was. And that's it was, yeah. I mean, the fact it lasted a year was luck more than anything else.
So, if it's okay with you, I want to transition for a second over from Crack the Clue and into microtransactions.
Mhm.
In a gaming industry where microtransactions are basically a consistency across the board at this point, how much pressure did you personally receive to add them into old school?
I mean, first off, are microtransactions standard? The thing is, microtransactions aren't all bad. In the right games and done correctly, they work really well. So they're really positive things. Um, did I come under pressure? Not significantly. I mean, I never sat in a meeting where somebody went microtransactions or you're fired. So that never happened by any means. It was, we discussed them an awful lot as you would expect commercial people to do in a business. But there's no, as far as I'm aware, there's still no plans to put them into old school. So
Did the discussions about whether or not they fit in old school, whether or not they should be added to old school, did those come from the investors or did that come from like the senior Jagex management that was involved with RS3?
So again, to put things into perspective, investors would never have that conversation. So think about how an investor would work. Investors, and again, I have no dealings with investors whatsoever at Jagex, so I'm just going from my experience dealing with investors since. An investor will care about money. An investor cares about money, but in the context of I have bought something for X hundreds of millions of pounds. How do I turn that X hundreds of millions of pounds into more hundreds of millions of pounds? The individual details of how that happens, they're not interested in. They've probably got no understanding really of what a microtransaction is, how it impacts the game, and everything else. And what they're doing is they are talking. They're thinking about investment portfolios. They're thinking about um, uh, regular income. They're thinking about average run rates and recurring revenues and things like that. They're not worried about the individual low level stuff. How much money is this making for me? How does it look on my portfolio? Can I borrow against this to make my portfolio bigger? That's the level they look at. I think I met some of the I met the Chinese owners because I don't think there actually are any investors in the RuneScape, are there? They are owners rather than investors. But and again, the way you got to think about investment is people do not buy something in order to make it lose money. And I think everybody would know. I mean, every player would understand that if microtransactions went into old school, people would leave. It would end up losing money. And that's not what big investors want. They don't want to do something and then it to start losing money because that's not how it works. A lot of the conversations I had with new people coming into the business and saying, microtransactions in old school because you haven't done that yet. And that is what a new person coming into the business that didn't understand old school would say. And that's exactly the right thing for them to say. You have the conversation saying that this is why we think it doesn't work. And then that's the conversation that happened quite often.
RuneScape 3 is quite a different game. Obviously that game has an immense amount of microtransactions in it. Were there ever any discussions about if RuneScape 3 were shut down, would old school see MTX trickle in at that point?
No, never had that conversation. I don't think anybody expects. I mean, I certainly don't expect RuneScape 3 to disappear. It's got there's a great website called Misplaced Items, and it's been tracking since 2013. The every 15 minutes it tracks the amount of concurrent users there are online. And when COVID happened, obviously there was a massive boost in users going online because COVID was COVID. But it's still real. I mean, RS3 is still really healthy from a player point of view. It's consistently going. It's up and down at times, but it's consistently going. And there's no expectation that I don't expect that to fail anytime soon.
Hmm.
And never when I was at Jagex either. So it was, there's never a conversation we had.
I think players tend to get nervous anytime a new parent company purchases Jagex. I mean, over the years, at least in recent years, it seems like the company has been purchased and sold maybe 3 or 4 times. I'm
Yeah,
not sure exactly how many. Is that something that is ever reason for concern when a new company
I don't
does
know.
purchase it? No.
No, no, unless it's EA. If EA buys it, then maybe worry. But I don't think EA will ever be. Like, they're going to announce next week that EA's bought them. You watch.
Hey, are you enjoying today's podcast so far? If so, I'd really appreciate if you could hit the like button, check that you're subscribed, and maybe even leave a comment if you feel like going the extra mile. Thank you for helping to support small content creators like me.
Anyway, as long as EA don't buy it, you're fine. But no, it's a really positive time. Think about why somebody buys a company. People buy companies to grow their money. In order to grow money, they're going to invest more in the company. They're going to make it do more cool and exciting things. If you look at what Jagex has done since as well, they bought a whole new studio. I mean, they've published a game, 2 games, I think. So they're looking at growing not just within RuneScape, but outside of RuneScape as well. So it's that to me is if you think about it from a company, an investor perspective, Jagex from being a 2 game company is now looking at publishing their own games. They now bought a studio, which I don't know what they're going to do with it, but they may well bring out some new games off the back of that. Um, so it looks like they're trying to branch out from just what is RuneScape, and that is a really positive thing.
I'm not sure if you read about their purchase that they just made in the US here, but they purchased I don't know if it was a small or mid-sized game studio. That was exciting because Jagex has never, to my knowledge, had a US presence before. Do you think that they'll ever pursue having like a US side office for old school?
I wouldn't say for old school. I think these. I mean, if I was to buy a studio, and again, I'm just guessing here about what's going through Jagex's mind, but if I was to buy a studio, I would want them working on something which probably isn't RuneScape because I want to diversify beyond what RuneScape is. It's a strong IP, but can these people do more stuff? And if you look at what that studio's done as well, they've worked on some pretty good games over the time. So they've got plenty of experience in working on some top quality games. So I'm really interested to see what they want to do.
You played a central role in the design and rollout of Deadman, correct?
Mhm. That's right. Yeah.
So there's a common sentiment that Deadman has come so close to just right, but it feels like the formula was maybe never 100% perfected. Jagex has tried the standard Deadman format, adding in 1v1s, adding in special relics recently to affect the gameplay, seasonal modes, and a permanent mode. Would you try anything differently to breathe new life into Deadman mode at this point, or do you think it's just run its course?
Hmm. I think so. The purpose of Deadman mode has changed. So when I first came up with the concept of Deadman mode, it was about creating emotions in people. So it was about the time when you're in the wilderness. This is back sort of 2004, 2005 time. You're in the wilderness. You're in your best gear. You see a white dot, and your heart starts beating. And that is a feeling I wanted to make when you played the game all the time. And the first iteration of it was, it never got live because it was so punishing. Was when you died, you'd have your bank wiped, your inventory wiped, and your account wiped as well. So you start as a level 3 again. So you literally reset to the beginning. And of course, everyone was like, "Matt, you're stupid. Can't do that." And people won't want to go for that. So we toned it down a bit from that. But over time, I think it sort of lost that feeling. It turned into something else, which is fine. Um, and it's now sort of a way of making PvPers happy by giving them some content they can do on a regular basis. Um, and to me, Deadman isn't that. If you want to create something which makes PvPers happy, you need to look at PvP as a whole, understand what's motivating people, what the modern PvPer wants, and then start creating PvP systems and games around that. And that's the only way I could see Deadman becoming a part of that is how do you look at PvP as a whole? How do you really understand what people want from it? Because what people want from PvP now is different to what they wanted 2 years ago, different to what they wanted 5 years ago, different to what they wanted 20 years ago. So going back to how it used to be back in the day is probably the biggest, worst mistake you can make with PvP right now. There's a whole new different desire to get from it. And if you want a good PvP area, you want to get people in, you want more people to engage in PvP because you want to have that fun, exciting, interesting fight. You want to separate your PvM from your PvP or your non-PvP content because those experiences between non-PvPers and PvPers isn't very good. So neither people are being happy. So you need to separate those out. And you just really need to understand what people want from PvP and then look at it holistically. Look at it from what role can Deadman play, what role can LNS play, what role does the wilderness play, and come up with how that works. It could be that Jagex is already doing this, but to me, it's a case of you need to look at it as a whole rather than just individual parts and how that works. Because by having a good, strong PvP community, which is constantly growing, which is constantly engaged, and constantly finding new ways of doing things, that's what I think will really make it flourish. And Deadman can be a part of that journey in some way or other.
PvP is one of the only communities that we've seen shrink over the years rather than expand, and it's no secret that the number of players who engage in PvP is a small subset of the community. Are PvP updates rare because Jagex looks at them as less valuable overall from a business perspective because they appeal to less players?
I don't know. I don't know if that is true. If that was true, the last bunch of raids or the raids 2 would have had the same problem because that only appeals to the top level people, which is all very exciting and all. But I mean, there'll be less people who do that sort of content than will do, um, I don't know, woodcutting, for example. And the way you can't really look at a game is we only work on what the majority of people will want to engage with. Because if you do that, then you start making really boring, dull content because it's just got to not offend anybody. It's just going to be bogs. It's kind of like the stuff that used to happen back in, I don't know, 2009, 2010. Lots of content was released in order to appeal to the most amount of users that could possibly use it. And it's just bland and boring. Um, and that to me was, not how you can go. You need to make content that's targeted at specific people. Even if they're a small group of people, you still need to target those people in order to make content and make the game feel exciting and full and get that overall picture of it. So I can't imagine that's the case. I think the biggest problem with PvP is um, there isn't an easy answer to it. If there's not an easy answer to it, there's easy answers to other problems. So you'd naturally go and solve those first. Um, and there's not a consistent answer to it. So if you get yourself 100 PvPers in a room and say, what should we do to make PvP better? You would get 100 different answers. And that's more so in PvP because everybody has their own way they like to do PvP and their own direction they see it going in, and different types of PvP. And it's just such a more difficult area to understand and work in. I think that's the difficulty.
Jagex seems to be investing less in Deadman in recent years and more into other temporary game modes like Leagues or King of the Skill, recently fresh start servers. Do you see that as the future for old school going forward?
I think there is a future. One of the fascinating things from Deadman that we learned was people played it because they loved the XP boost. They didn't care about the PvP side of it. In fact, that was that was a turn off for them. But they got the XP boost and they loved that. So when Kieran, I think it was, did the first leagues, had the XP boost, and you're like, that's exactly what should have happened off the back of that. You should have done that years previously, because then you could have your PvP content and your leagues content and your PVM content, and that's I think it's great. So it's a real positive move. Is there a new leagues coming? I haven't heard of anything for a while now.
Not since the last one was announced. I think the most recent Leagues-esque item that was announced is the Fresh Start Worlds that'll be coming, where it's a new economy, completely isolated game worlds, and people will have that experience of kind of being able to start from the first day of old school, since you can't, go back in time and experience that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very different. I mean, I sort of read through what they were talking about there, and to me, I think it's a really clever thing what they've done. So if you look at what they've said and what they've tried, what they've are trying to do with it, it feels like new players are coming into the game. They're not staying with the game as long as they should be. One of the reasons they probably identified off the back of this is, like, if I'm spending time as a new player doing stuff, I'm collecting low level items. I can't sell those low level items because they're worth nothing on the GE, because they're all done by bots or other accounts. I don't know if bots is correct. They're all done. There's so many of these items in game, they're worth nothing. Therefore, it's very difficult for me to make gold. Therefore, it's difficult for me to buy stuff, progress in the game, and I get bored more quickly and lapse out of the game and stop playing. So what they've probably looked at it and gone, right, how do we solve this? Well, if we put them in a world where it's got a new starter economy, so higher end items are super, super expensive in that economy because there's not so many of them, but the lower end items are more expensive, therefore I can get more money. Then that will hopefully get people to engage for longer because they can make money easier. They progress through the game easier. And that, to me, I think it's a brilliant idea, a way of doing it. Separate them out, move them 6 months later into the main economy where that economy is more suited for them. I think that's very clever. And when you think about how a game works and how the funnel works in a game, you start off at the very top with, these are all the players that get hit by my advertising campaigns. These are the players that visit the website. These are the players that create an account. These are the players that get through this tutorial. It just goes down and creates this little funnel with all these different things. They've obviously identified this bit down the bottom that says, right, let's keep them after 3 months or 2 months or whatever. And this is a brilliant way of doing it. So I think this is a really clever idea. I think the community has sort of looked at it and they're seeing it as, oh my God, it's a money making thing. I read all the stuff today about RS3 and the problems they had today, and the vitriol that's flying around at that point. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, it is about money, but then the company's got to make money, because if they don't, you don't have a game. It's why companies exist. But in old school, this seems a really clever way of doing it. And some people will want to play in it from start, from fresh, and I mean that's great if they want to. But I would imagine that's the minor part of where the value lies for Jagex.
Old School is a game whose foundation is built on nostalgia and sort of a clunky click and point charm. I guess my question is, can Jagex be successful in recruiting new players to Old School when they have to compete with more modern games and AAA titles, and that's why they're moving towards these temporary game modes?
I don't think so. I think what you'll find, and again, I'm just going from guesswork here, is that people will play for X amount of months out of the year, and by having these temporary game modes, that X amount of months they play goes up, and that is probably what's happening there. Would be my assumption from it. Do they have to worry about, so in the whole history of Old School in particular, the only two games that have ever impacted Old School were the release of Fallout 4 and Pokemon Go.
Hmm.
No other games had an impact on Old School at all. Even WoW Classic, everything else you just don't see any notice whatsoever. It's just those two games that have had an impact. So the way to sort of look at that is go right. People will play Old School no matter what. There's very few things that are going to interrupt that. Um, So how do you either get people to want to play it more because that's the driver? It's not about compete with somebody else. You want to play it more because you know that the old school RuneScape's a second screen game. You will play your main game and you'll have old school on the side. And while that is a way to play it, then that's what's going to keep it fresh. So you need more people to want to come and play it as a second screen game, rather than necessarily a first screen game.
Going back to your point a minute ago about how when new players join the game, they're acquiring resources, and those resources might not be valuable because either the market is just flooded with them, and that might be in part due to bots, potentially just uh, botting out those resources, knowing that they're going to get banned, instantly dumping them, and that drives the price down. I'm curious, in your data streams and in your data analysis that you did at your time at Jagex, was it ever identified what the estimated percentage of the player base was bots at any given time?
Yeah, so I think I said this a few times back then as well. I think we would talk about between 5 and 10% is our estimation. We can never be sure, of course, because there's no 100% way of tracking bots. Um, but yeah, I think that's what we used to say back then, between 5 and 10.
Okay. Oh, and I didn't have this scripted either, but since your departure, the Duel Arena has been removed. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that?
Um, Duel Arena, Duel Arena. I think, is it good that it's gone? I don't see that it's made a lot of difference. So I think what's happened in the Duel Arena has moved into a more public arena. So it's now in Lumbridge, not Lumbridge at all, Edgeville. It's now in Edgeville, low level wilderness. Edgeville seems to be, and the PvP worlds is where it happens. To me, I guess my worry is that you've taken it from a place where there's systems in place to stop cheating and make it safe from a scamming point of view, and it's now moved to an area where that isn't in place anymore. So that's my worry about it. And if I'm somebody who suffers from gambling addiction, then it's almost gone underground, and that support you get from having a system where you know it works or it doesn't work is no longer there. So I don't know how. I'd love to know how much what impact it has had, but I honestly don't know. Yeah.
There were some discussions, especially driven by content creators like KempQ, about how the Duel Arena may have been sort of a entry point for gambling addiction for some people. There's certainly several stories that community members have shared about that. Was that ever a discussion that came up at Jagex when trying to decide what to do with the Duel Arena?
So the removal of the Duel Arena was after my time, so obviously I wasn't there for any discussions around that area. Before I left, I did ask the question of what would happen to the game if we got rid of the Duel Arena, but then I left shortly afterwards, so I never saw the answer to that.
Fair enough. So much happened under your direction at Jagex. I'm curious what you consider to be your favorite events or releases during your time.
Oh dear. First Deadman, definitely that was great. When Deadman first came out, that was just nobody expected it to be the success that it was. So that was quite exciting. Um, um, we also had first big bit of content we did, God Wars. That was a monumental time because that was the time that the game stopped shrinking and started growing. Because obviously there's a huge amount of hype as you get with every game when it comes out. Old school, 300,000 people, whatever it was at the beginning, and people started lapsing out pretty quickly. We were doing the best we could back then by releasing all the rare items um, in order to keep people engaged. And then we had that moment when suddenly people realised, they are going to be updating the game with significant stuff. When God Wars came out, and it just grew consistently for the next sort of 4 years after that. Every week, up it went.
Hmm.
That was quite nice.
And to flip that
Um,
question on its head, do you have any regrets or wish you'd done anything differently with content or releases during your time?
oh, I'm sure there's lots of regrets, and there's lots of stuff we could have done better. But I'm again the things that went wrong are things that shape you and make better decisions in the future. And without those things, they uh, wouldn't have made some of the better decisions going forward. If there's one thing that I wish to know, I wish I'd never passed a poll. Um, was shift click drop. Because that to me was the moment where suddenly, because dropping was always a skill that you had to have in order to be efficient at playing the game. And when that passed, that was the first step. It was like, oh, the game isn't what it used to be. The game has moved on now, and it's a different game. Because that to me was the first step where suddenly it became easier and easier to play. And yeah, shift click drop was that moment for me. When I suddenly realised, this isn't the game I played back in 2007. We now need to start looking at how we look at it differently.
Speaking of polls, Old School's polling system was designed very intentionally, and it's another example of your team completely breaking industry standards. I mean, nobody else was letting the player base drive the direction of their games at the time. Reflecting on that, do you think that the Old School team really nailed the polling system, or is there anything that you might consider changing today?
Um, I think for what we needed back at the beginning, it was fine. It did the job. It could have been better. Um, I can't think of any particular reason. There's always debate over whether 75% was the right number. Um, there was the issue I always had with hiding the poll results. Because my biggest issue with hiding the poll results is what if nothing passes a poll anymore? So the fact that we had so much hit 74.9 or 75.1 wasn't accidental. People knew what was coming and they would vote in order to get things to where they wanted to. So everything grouped around that 75%. Had the pass rate been 65%, then I'm pretty sure everything would have, still been the same. We'd hit a lot more 64.9s rather than 65s. Um, but my worry was if we suddenly hide the results, that goes away because the results do influence it. And once we take that influence away, we might find out, the honest thing of what people think and the honest opinion of what people think. But if that means nothing passes a poll, then you've suddenly got this problem: is we can't update the game anymore, which means one of two things have to happen: either we get rid of the polling system, or the game dies. So the polling system that could have caused the death of the polling system had it gone that way. So we ran some tests, obviously, and it just turned out that now everything passes a poll. So unless it's really bad. So that obviously didn't come to fruition. But that was my worry about that side of things. Um, but anyway, beyond that, I think, is the poll system fit for service now? Is it a benefit to the game, or is it holding it back? Um, I would look at the polling system. The biggest challenge I had when at Jagex was trying to understand what people wanted who either didn't vote or didn't talk. So they weren't shouting in Reddit, or they weren't voting in the polls. What do these people want? Because that's the vast majority of people, and these are the people you got to understand and listen to. And the way we did that was look at what they were doing in game, because that helped influence us on what we should be working. But how many people, how many individuals have voted in a poll over the last 12 months? And what's that percentage of the entire player base that's gone through the game? And if it turns out small, you're suddenly talking that 8% of people are deciding the content that goes into the game. I mean, that's a number I pulled out my arse. It could be
Oh,
anything. It could be
okay.
88%. I don't know. I just made that number up. So if it's 8%, then suddenly you're like, actually, this isn't a fair representation of what people want. But if it is 88%, then it's like, all right, fine, carry on. So that's the thing. I don't have the numbers to say that, but it feels to me that we're not getting a lot of content going into the game, which should go into the game because they know it won't pass a poll. Therefore, why do they put effort into it? Which creates the next problem of where does the unique content come from now? So I think one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest watershed moments, I think, for the game was the failing of um, that skill,
Artisan?
warding. That's it,
Oh, warding. Okay.
warding. Because warding, to me, I mean, it wasn't a great skill. It was a very RuneScapey skill. I mean, I remember sort of thinking that when I first read through it, I was like, this seems really boring, but the whole team were really excited about it. So I was like, okay, I'm wrong here. This obviously, a lot of people are seeing this exciting. This skill isn't boring. But yeah, I still think that skill was a boring skill, which is why I didn't pass a poll. But what both the community and Jagex, I think, learned from that experience was Jagex learned that why should we spend so much time trying to get something to pass a poll when we know we can just poll a new raid every 3 years, a skilling boss once a year, 2 high-level quests a year, another boss encounter a year, and they'll all pass. So we might as well just do that, and then that'll just keep everybody happy. We just take the same content and rinse and repeat it. Why would they go out of their way to try something new and revolutionary? And that's what I think was lost from that, because you look back at what the community reacts to it, and suddenly if something starts getting pushed at them, they immediately go, "Whoa, stop trying to push your ideas on us." And you get that thing. Sounds like you've got an opinion on that.
Well, I was just going to ask, does that go back to when we were talking about PvP earlier, about how that it sort of sounds like it's doing development to cater to the popular opinion rather than trying out riskier content that, might fail dramatically, or it might pass with flying colors and be a massive success like Raids 3 was.
Yeah, and I would suggest that if there is, I mean, with PvP in particular, if you make big PvP changes, it will fail a poll. So you can't do that. Therefore, if and again, if you want to solve PvP, I don't think tweaking around the edges is going to make a difference. It is big, massive content changes, big, massive systems changes. The most success we ever had with Old School was when something significant happened to it. So you look at the big moments that really got excitement around Old School. Free to play was one. Deadman was one. Mobile was one. I think of other ones now off the top of my head. There's another one. Oh yeah, full screen. That was one.
Really? Wow.
RuneRite. So these systems changes are the fundamental thing. These big tentpole, massive steps in what you can do in the game are things that make a big impact to it. And the little things that go around in the background, they're fine. They just keep the game growing bit by bit by bit. But if you want a big tentpole, it's something massive that's got to happen. And if you want to have PvP and get PvP working, yeah, you can do a few updates to LMS. You can do a few updates and introduce bounty hunter. You can do this, you can do that, the other. But if you want to make fundamental change, which is going to get people excited, engaged, bring people back to the game, you've got to make significant changes. And that change will never pass a poll. That change will upset probably every PvPer the game currently has, which is why you've got to be careful with it. And you've got to go out there and say, look, we're going to make changes, and they're going to be big changes, because PvP cannot exist the way it is right now. So we're going to make fundamental changes to how this thing works. And yes, we know you're going to get upset, but we want to get more people PvPing.
Outside of PvP, though, I mean, you brought some of those giant changes that you're talking about to the game. I mean, you brought Deadman, you brought Zaya, you brought the first raid the game has never gotten.
Yeah, I think there are 3 more big things. Yeah.
How do you get those through a poll if players are apprehensive? Or I mean, you're right. You kind of have to design that content in a way where you're trying to get it through a poll. Like, what is that like from a development perspective?
I think at the beginning it was fine because people were excited about stuff. People wanted new stuff, and that was fine. I think right now it's not in that position anymore. And I think it's that sense of excitement's been forgotten. So how do you get to start it up again? I mean, this is why I think potentially the poll system needs to go in some areas where big systems, big changes, fundamental changes can happen, and not for them,
Oh,
I think that was it.
integrity changes. Yes, where you
Integrity
forced it
changes,
through the poll. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So that to me is an integrity change is such a uh, emotional response to anything. It's I want to do a thing. We know it's not going to poll, so we'll call it integrity change. Um, but some things, you've got to take responsibility. Say we're going to make a big change, and we're not going to poll it. We're going to change the polling structure so that it now delivers what you guys need it to do. What are the quality of life polls will always continue happening because they're such a good thing to help people prioritize what goes into the game. You can have polls on fundamental bits of medium-sized updates. I don't know how they'd work it, but there's fundamental systems changes that need to go in unpolled. And basically, if you've got, like I said, if you've got 8% of the community deciding what's going into the game, that to me is immediately immediate thing of saying, well, actually, this 8% aren't relevant to the other 92%. But again, I could be wrong there. It could be that it is 88% of people are voting in polls, but I kind of doubt it. None of the, I doubt very few mobile people would vote, I would imagine. So you need to think of it from a different angle.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. In terms of integrity changes and unpulled changes, is that not how we end up with the evolution of combat? What would you say to players following that line of thinking? Because I
I
mean,
mean, if
there is.
anybody,
Sorry.
no, you're absolutely right. But if anybody ever thinks evolution of combat is going to happen again, I mean, that's that. I think they've learned their lesson from that. I don't think that's going to happen. Um, so yeah, so bad things could come into the game. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, which is why it's not about necessarily polling, but it's about that communication. Why are we doing these things? Why are we changing? And again, going back to PvP, because obviously it's the thing I put the most thought into. If you are going to make fundamental changes, you've got to be open about why. And you've got to say, look, our research says this. Our research says this, and this is what people are doing. And yet we know that the loudest voices over here, here, and here don't agree with this. But if 80% of players are playing as Zerka Pures, that tells us something much more about them. I mean, that's a number again I made up, so who knows? But if this is where PvP is happening, then we've got to understand why, and we've got to make action based upon that. And this is why we're doing it. And we know it's not going to pass polls. We're not going to poll it, but we think this is best in these areas. And that communication's got to be there, and that trust has got to be there to say, oh, actually, that makes sense.
Do you think we'll ever see a point in time where PvP is sort of self-contained within, say, Bounty Hunter and LMS, maybe the PvP arena, if that ever gets rewards and has an incentive for doing? Because there's so much friction at the moment among players who feel like they're forced into the wilderness for one reason or another, who aren't interested in engaging in PvP, and then the people who are roaming the wilderness trying to find people to either fight or, prey, basically, to pounce on. Will that ever be separated in your opinion, or do you think we're going to just have to find some balance where both parties are sacrificing a little bit of something?
Yeah, I think it's got to change. It's got to be separated. So if you think about when I sort of go through my thought process on why people want to PvP, people want to PvP. They want to have a fight with somebody else. They want to find it easy to find a fight, and they want to have a good fight. They'd love it if they win it every time, but most people are realistic and say, actually, I know I'm not going to win every fight that I have. But when I lose a fight, I've lost it for a good reason. Now that to me is a positive experience in PvP. I have a fight, I win some, I lose some. When I lose some, I know I've lost some, and I feel bad about it, but next day I don't feel quite so good about it. Now, currently in the wilderness, if you are going up to do your clue, you've got somebody who wants to fight somebody, and the PvPer will go and kill the person to take their spade, and he won't have a great experience because he's not getting a great fight. He's just just wailing on somebody, and he's getting nothing for it. The person who's just lost their spade, he's not getting anything because he couldn't even be bothered to fight. He's dropped his stuff and ran, and that's it. Neither of them have got a good experience. So why are you putting these two people in together to do that? And I think it worked again. 5-6 years ago, it was fine. That was what people expected to do. But PvP and what people want from it now has moved on. Therefore, that has changed, and that experience is now a bad experience for both sides. I think we've seen that evolve over the last sort of 3-4 years. So when I sort of sit there and I think about it, I'm like, what else has to come out of the wilderness? Anything which doesn't have a specific PvP benefit should come out of the wilderness. So that's the bosses I would take out. I mean, potentially you could have the bosses in there, but you'd have PvP specific equipment drop from the bosses, so you turn them into a PvP thing. I want to fight it because that's the only place I get PvP stuff from. It doesn't drop anything PVM. Those bosses can be somewhere else as well, and other bosses can come in, more content, drop those items elsewhere, for example. That way you can get those communities to start actually engaging in a positive way again, rather than always whenever you meet a PvP, it's because you're in the wilderness about to get killed by them, which is not it's not how you make friends. So there's that. Yeah. So I think fundamental change has to happen.
Jagex is sort of currently leaning in a different direction. I'm not. Have you familiarized yourself with the wilderness boss rework that's been proposed?
I think I looked at it. I don't think I looked much more at it.
Okay.
I think I looked at it and went, "Makes sense,"
So
and where
I'm
they were going for it. So
I'm probably gonna butcher this, so any PvPers watching this video, I'm very sorry. I'm probably gonna get some things wrong here. But basically, the idea, I think, is that you're going to need to bring some level of risk with you just in order to enter the boss layer, whether that's 50k or 100k, whatever it is. And then once you're inside, you have the ability to fight the bosses, get some incredibly valuable drops, and once you've obtained those drops, you have to run out through the cave system, potentially past a bunch of PvPers in order to exit the wilderness. Do you think that strikes the right balance, or is that still leaning in too heavily to the predator versus prey relationship that's been sort of proven to not work at this point?
but it sounds very similar to the ghostly things I've had. What were they called? The
Revenants.
ghostly, yeah, the revenants. It sounds very similar to that, in all honesty, just with bosses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I expect it to go the same way. Well, I'm sure Rot will be in there controlling the worlds and farming those bosses. Uh, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it's the way they want to go, and they've got more data on this than me. So I mean, I certainly wouldn't say I know more than them by any means. But we'll see. We'll see how it all pans out.
Is the clan lockdown a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion?
I think purely if you look at it from a pure community side, it's quite an exciting thing because you've got a group of people who are working together. Unfortunately, it always creates bad toxic behaviour. And if there were more than one clan, or if there were multiple clans who could, stop it from happening, that's not a bad thing either.
There was a story on NPR here in the US a few years ago that was done
Mm.
on the Revenant Caves. I'm not sure if you heard it, but it was talking about how the Venezuelan gold farmers were grouping together in order to fight Rot for control of the Revenant Caves. And it was such a ridiculous it
Yeah.
was accurate, but it was such a ridiculous story that was happening. Did Jagex learn any lessons from the Revenant Caves during your time about how that played into the overall atmosphere of PvP in the game?
I think the thing we learned was not to let Jed design them. Sorry, couldn't resist.
As far as other player requests go, players have been asking for better account security tools, server stability improvements, and real customer support for as long as I can remember. Time and time again, we've seen these promised, and then they just seem to get repeatedly dropped. What's standing in the way from those things from actually happening?
I think the reasons people lose accounts is social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the fact that accounts have been shared for the past 20 years. So if you think about, account security back 15 years ago, it's very different then than it is now. And people just didn't. I mean, people were 15 years younger. They shared accounts with their friends. The details are out there. They got hijacked no amount of times because people shared details with all sorts of people. And the problem that Jagex has got is that this information is still there, and you can still use that information to recover accounts. So if you've still got the information for something 15 years ago, I can prove to you now that I was on that account 15 years ago because I know that information you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, can I have my account back, please? And that's the challenge. Had email security, password requests been a thing 15 years ago, been the standard 15 years ago, then this wouldn't exist. But it wasn't. This is a long term game that's had an account system in place for so long, and it's the same problem that every company's had to deal with. And I think Blizzard had the same problem, and then they moved to BattleNet at some point, and then just made that right. You got to have a BattleNet account. You got to sign up for a new one now, and they drew a line in the sand and said, anything after this, that's it. You're done. We will. You've got your email. That's it, and no other security is needed. That hasn't happened at Jagex, these long accounts, and they're still battling with it.
It's cat and mouse, isn't it?
Indeed, there's no answer. I mean, they've been looking for answers for 10 years to solve this problem, and they haven't come up with one. It's not they don't want to solve it; it's just that it's not an easy thing to solve.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's an incredibly difficult problem. Do you think that customer support is as complicated a problem to try to tackle?
So again, it all depends on what sort of support you're looking for. So um, if you've been hijacked, you've still got the fundamentals. You got the systems in place to protect you from that. So I've been hijacked. I can try and recover my account, and then that page exists for you to already to do that. So you can do that. That then sets off several things in the back end, which allows Jagex to sort of look further into it. If you've been banned, you've got an appeal process for that. Occasionally, I don't think everything can be appealed, but you can appeal some things.
Can I pause you there for one sec?
Yeah.
Do you know if those appeals are reviewed by a real person or if it's an automated
Yeah, I believe
system?
so, yeah. They always were when I were there.
Okay.
When the responses you used to get were, automated responses, so they'd press a button, send a response, which is why I think a lot of people thought, they were automated, but that from what I remember, they were always checked manually. Um, so yeah, so you've got an appeal network to, appeal against, bans. Where else would you need to contact them? Billing problems, I think they're all right. If you've got a billing problem, you can message the billing thing and you get the support, and that gets sorted out from what I can tell. So to me, the issues that people have is, when they're not getting the answer they want. So I have tried to recover my account and I can't. Help, I need to contact Jagex to find out why. But then Jagex are basing that information on the data that's on the account, on the details that are on the account. There's nothing more they can say other than you haven't given us the right information, and we're not going to tell you what the right information is because you don't know it and you can't prove to us that we know it. And this person may have been playing on that account all their life. But if it's not matching what Jagex is seeing, then they don't know that, and they're not going to trust somebody to who says that. I've had my account banned, but I honestly didn't do it, Governor. Please unban me. Again, Jagex has looked at the evidence. They haven't just said, "Oh, we don't like you because for some reason we're just going to ban your account." They're looking at the evidence. For everyone, this account has done this thing, and there's the proof for it. There's the account that's done it. Right? They're not going to share the botting evidence, obviously, but they look at evidence to do that. They don't just randomly ban people, and they get things wrong occasionally, but everybody always does.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about is, do you have any sense of, say, out of how many bans, what the margin of error is for false bans?
I mean, we talk in multiple nines, so 99.999 whatever is correct, I would expect. There's such a but so many bans are done, you're going to catch a few. I think they said they did a message last year. I think they said about 10,000 a day get banned
Hmm.
in old school, and probably the same again in RS3 on the news post that they put out. So that's a few people each day, and you just got to catch somebody who's regularly on Reddit, and suddenly it could snowball from there. So yeah, I mean, it's the thing where you always hear about the problems, but I mean, I can't remember what the number was, but Jagex used to get contacted by customers something like 100,000 times a day in different things, whether it's password appeals or ban appeals or whatever. They used to have like 100,000 contacts or some ridiculously high number. And they had to deal with all of them. They dealt with all of them every single day, and that's not an easy thing to do. And they get some wrong, and it sucks, and you can't. So I mean, poor old anti-cheat team. I mean, they could spend all day on Twitter answering questions, and it will be the same things. It'll be, "I've been banned incorrectly." "No, you haven't. You were banned correctly." "I've been banned incorrectly." "Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, you're one of the ones that did." "Okay, right, fair enough." But when it boils down to it, if you're banning 10,000 people a day, you've got to expect you're going to get some people incorrect, because otherwise you're going to have to put so much resource into making sure everything's 100% correct all the time that that the cost of the game will just rocket, because you've got to employ 1,000 people to do it. And the people who pay for that are the people who pay for membership.
Is it a scalability problem in the end then, like for the players who say, couldn't we just hire people to do a live chat support instead of Twitter?
Oh man, I mean, okay, our community, right? Do you want to sit on live chat? No.
Fair
Who would
point.
want to do that job?
Yeah,
So,
that's a fair point.
well, you would get nobody would just stick the job out for more than about a week. It's that's the other part of the problem is who would do that. And again, scalability. The more people you employ, I mean, it's a huge amount of money. So we did a thing to say, right, if I was to have a JMod standing at the GE on World 301, just banning people 24/7, how many people would you need? You need 3 people every day. They work 8-hour shifts, so you need 3 people every day. They're going to take. They only work 5 days a week, so you're going to need another 2 people on top of that. So suddenly you've employed 5 people. There's going to be holidays as well, so you probably need a couple on top of that. And you need someone to manage them all. So you're talking 8 people to start with, just to stand in one spot on the world map and ban people. And you got to pay these people. So I mean, let's say they're 30 grand each. You have to pay probably 50% on top of that for all the costs that involve around employing somebody. So suddenly you're spending 45 grand per person. Alexa, what's 45 times 8?
45 times 8 is 360.
So you're spending just short of £500,000 just to do that. And it's like, yeah, okay. So suddenly the numbers just rocket as soon as you start employing people to do stuff.
I think it makes sense when you're looking at the numbers from a business perspective. And also, like you said, just like retention wise, good luck finding someone willing to sit there for 12 hours a day fielding like Redditors, who are
Yeah,
crying about
indeed.
false bans. In terms of your time at Jagex, when Old School started out, it was a team of 3, is that right?
That's 4 of us at the beginning. There was me, there was Dan, there was Ash, and Mod Nexus.
Okay.
He was always very quiet and in the background.
Did he ever appear on Q&As? I can't recall seeing Mod Nexus.
I don't remember. I think he's on. He was only with us for a few months at the beginning, I think, and he moved on to do other things. I think maybe even before we started doing the Q&As.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make sense. Given that it was such a small team at the beginning, in your wildest dreams, did you ever expect that Old School would grow to become what it has today?
I don't think anybody did. I mean, I think when I joined, I had been in the publishing department for 6 months prior to that. We're publishing games like War of Legends and that sort of thing. And there was no new games due to come out, and it was the budget was looking pretty low for the year, and I was like, this doesn't look like it's going to end well. So I sort of went to my boss and said, look, the Old School thing's happening. Can you get me that gig? And I thought, right, okay, I've got 6 months either in the publishing department before that gets shut down because they're just not producing, or I've got 6 months in Old School Runescape. And everybody expected it to fail in 6 months. They thought, it's not going to be a game. So I thought, at least I can spend my last 6 months at Jagex enjoying myself. And obviously, what happened, and we turned it into the biggest game Jagex had. So it was nobody expected it to do that, but I think it worked because we were left alone. Nobody cared about the game. Everybody thought it would fail. It was quite interesting. The first few meetings we had catch-up meetings with the senior people in the company, and every week a less senior person would come to that meeting, and over time none of them would turn up. So by this time we were like, well, they don't care about us. They're focusing on RuneScape 3 things and doing stuff with that. So we just did what we wanted, and that involved this unique way of approaching games, which was let's listen to your customers and do what they say. And when we started doing that, that seemed to work, and that's all we did. I mean, that was all we did for years. Just listen to what people wanted, and then did it. And obviously, prioritization of what is more important than others, and making sure you're listening to the right people, and what have you, was always a thing. But it was a fundamental thing of listen to your customers, do what they say, and generally it works out. And it did. And that was that sort of shifted the entirety of Jagex around to sort of how we approach and present ourselves to players altered off the back of what we did on Old School, and suddenly became a lot more accessible to players, a lot more what's the right word? A lot more accessible, a lot more uh, personable to them as well. They saw us as persons. They learned to trust us, and they learned to believe what we said. And if we made mistakes, we're like, "Oh shit, sorry." Everybody makes mistakes, and people understood it. And that's how we grew what it was. And the whole of Jagged shifted around to take that approach, and it worked really well.
Would you be willing to share your reasons for why you left? Because as someone who was there from day one, I can't imagine that that was a decision that you took lightly.
Yeah, it was time to do something new. I think when you've been somewhere for 15 years, you have to look for new things. You don't want to get pigeonholed into one thing. You need to focus on yourself a bit, and focus on doing something different. And that's what I did. I took a complete change, moving from a game which was working on effectively 20-year-old tech to a company which was working on bleeding edge tech that people had never used, doing brand new things that no one had done before, and that was the change I wanted to make in myself, to do that and to prove that I could do something different.
Was it hard to make that step to actually leave after being there from, old school being a baby? It was something that you thought wasn't going to last, and then you got to see it, bloom into this product that eclipsed the company's previous biggest product. I mean,
Yeah, I'll tell you what. There's one thing which you might recognise this. There's one thing which made me realise that it was the right decision, which was this image that was created. Because that immediately showed me it's like it didn't need me anymore, and it needed somebody else to take it forward and do the next step of things. And that to me just made me feel that this was the right thing to do, and yeah, it grew from there. So I was yeah,
I love that you
it was
have that,
hard. Of
by the
course, it's
way.
hard. Sorry.
I said I love that you have that, by the way.
So I've got two copies of it. I've got a signed one from people at work as well.
Hmm.
So so yeah, so it's it was, to me it was, sometimes it's time to move on, to let space for other people who can think in different ways, do things, and that was what it was about. Let's do that, and let the game progress in ways that I wasn't able to take it next.
Is it okay if I go on a rant for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm married. I'm used to ignoring things.
Okay. So the old school team has grown and changed so much over the years, and I've
Mhm.
really appreciated and respected every iteration that the team's gone through. I think that the current state's fantastic, and I feel like we're in great hands with today's team. But if I were to respectfully criticize the current team on one thing, it's that when we had you leading the team, you were always willing to have the hard conversations. And you never shied away from delivering difficult news, and you were never afraid to come out on a Q&A, look into the camera and say we got it wrong. um, I always had tremendous respect for the way that you handled those difficult situations, and I feel like since your departure we've lost some of the finesse around managing those hard discussions. And I've said this to my friends privately over the years, but I'll go on record and say it publicly now. I think that you leaving Jagex was the worst thing that's happened to old school. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is there any scenario where you might consider coming back?
No, no, I'm not coming back. No, I would see it as a step backwards. I think, to go back to Jagex. So yeah, no plans whatsoever on that. I've got a job which is challenging me in many different ways. I get to hang out with the community because obviously I still stream, I still play the game, and I get to enjoy the game as well. The only thing that I'm missing from my life is that influence over where the game's going. That's the only thing that I feel I've missed. I've missed leaving Jagex, is that influence. But it's it is what it is. But I think I've got the best of both worlds, and I've got no intention of going back, I'm afraid. Soz.
That's a good answer, but you're breaking my heart a little bit here. I was hoping you'd say, "Oh, as a matter of fact, I'll be rejoining next month."
If I am, they haven't told me.
As we're wrapping up here, is it okay if we do like a quick rapid fire round where I'll ask you a question, you just give me a quick yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay. Will old school ever get a new skill?
Yes.
Will we ever see MTX in old school?
No.
Do you think old school will be around in 10 years?
Yes.
Will RuneFest ever come to the US?
No.
Will we ever see old school get live customer support?
No.
Is that really tea that Ash is always drinking from his mug?
No comment.
Should Jagex unban Rendy?
Yes.
Care to elaborate on that one at all?
Nope.
Do you think that Jagex is planning on opening an Argentina office? Because I hear there's a guy from Jagex hanging out down there, so just curious.
No.
Before we close, I just want to go ahead and give you the floor to add anything else or share anything that you might want to with the listeners.
I mean, the only thing I've got to share is probably a story of how I know old school is so important. And it all started one day when somebody in the office, one of the commercial guys, come to me and said, "Man, you must love money." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you're the product manager. You must love money." And the response I gave him was, "Do you honestly think that I get out of bed every morning and work all the late nights and work 7 days a week because this game makes money for some Chinese bloke to wipe his ass with an extra $50 note? Do you honestly think that's what gets me out of bed in the morning?" So, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" I was like, "No, no, no. What gets me out of bed in the morning is when I talk to people who have met their partners online, have got married and now got children, people who have learned English because they've played RuneScape, people who have um, there's one story about a guy whose parents died, and RuneScape got him through that difficult time after his parents died. The amount of people who have become game developers, have entered the gaming industry because they've played RuneScape. These are the reasons that make RuneScape great. These are the reasons that get me and got the old school team out of bed, because we knew the impact that RuneScape has on people's lives. And that's the one thing that you can't forget, is RuneScape is not just a game. It is a part of our lives. You're making a living off this. So it's such a wonderful thing to be a part of. And even if we've got 101 differences across the world, RuneScape is something which really coalesces the people who play it and really makes an impact on people's lives, and that should never be forgotten.
What a beautiful way to end. Matt, can you please tell all the listeners where they can find your streams and social media?
Yes, yeah. So I'm real Matt K everywhere on Twitter and Twitch. I have a Discord apparently, although I never log into it, as you know, because I never reply to your messages.
No problem.
Yeah, but yeah, feel follow me on Twitter and Twitch.
Yep, I'll be linking
Really
those down below. Matt streams quite frequently old school content, and you have a very cool system in your stream where people, I think you can still do this. I admittedly, last time I tuned in was your stream on Saturday, but people can redeem channel points for different stories, and you have a whole
Yes,
notebook just filled with fantastic stories.
I have my notebook, 80 stories in it.
There you go. Go tune in. You'll get some
Stories.
really quality stories about Jagex and Matt's time there. Well, Matt, thank you. I just want to say I've really enjoyed and appreciated your time today. And I know you said you won't, but I really hope there's some parallel universe out there where we might get to see the return of Matt K to old school.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great.
If you're interested in more old school podcasts, Ultimate Iron Man, or variety old school content, consider dropping a sub and a like on your way out. Thank you so much for watching.